In this episode, I'm going to show you this whole side being finished and sanded and filling in all of the cracks and trimming off the excess cedar that needs to be trimmed from the edge where I planked it. So the first thing was sanding the excess epoxy from the cedar, and for that I used this belt sander, which really just went through the epoxy like it wasn't even there. The whole place turned very dusty. Trying to capture that on video was not going to work because this whole place was just a dust cloud. I had a respirator on and made it through it, but it wasn't really that good for videoing. It's just me sanding, but I did get it completely smooth. And here I'm going to switch the camera angles, and I'm going to show you the next step, which turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And for the next whole side, I'm going to do things a bit differently. So you can see what the belt sander did. I mean, it took this all the way down to the cedar, and any excess epoxy just completely smooth. And after that, I went back through with thickened epoxy and filled in all of the cracks. So that's where you can see these patches where I've filled in all of these. So there was quite a large gap between the cedar planks that I had to fill in. But the hardest part was there's going to be fiberglass eventually covering this entire surface, and fiberglass doesn't go across sharp edges very well. So the really hard part was tapering this first board down to the level of this plywood. So we now have a nice smooth transition here. Previously this came out and it went straight down, and I actually used this lip here that was hanging out as a place to hook the clamps onto to pull these boards in. But getting this sanded down was quite difficult. Even the belt sander was quite difficult to get that sanded down. So what I think I'm going to do for the next hull side is these first two boards that I put down, I'm going to angle this already. So most of this wood is going to be taken down, and I'm not going to have this clamping surface here. So I think what I'm going to do is hook up something to hook onto the edge here and extend something out to here with like maybe a little hook at the end, and I'll connect my clamps to that instead. So I'll be pulling against the edge of the hull from here instead of trying to pull from this wood that is sticking out here, because that's not going to be there on the next hull side. But other than that, the sanding went really well, and after the belt sander, I went over it again with the random orbiter sander and just kind of touched that up. And once everything was sanded, I then went through and filled in. Here's another gap that I had to fill in. So just filled in all of the gaps. So all that's left now is to do a final sanding on this. I'll probably do that tomorrow because the epoxy's still a little bit, it's not sticky, but it's not completely hard yet either. So it makes sanding it right now a little bit difficult. But once that is sanded, I'll be able to flip this over and trim off the excess cedar that's here on the edges. Now, once I flip this over, I'm going to stand this whole side up kind of the way I had it before. I'm going to stand it up here. So that's going to make it difficult to get to the planer and the table saw here. So before I flip this up and move it out of the way to start working on the other hull side, I'm going to plane more of the cedar boards. I've got my cedar boards stacked right here, and I need to plane enough cedar boards like I did on this side to be able to plank the next hull side. And this hull side used 10 of these cedar boards. So these are about 3.5 inches wide, and you know, they claim they're 1 inch thick, but you know, it's never really exactly 1 inch thick, and which is okay because I'm planing them down to about 1/2 inch thick anyway. But I need 10 of those, and each board is about 10 feet long. So that's the amount of material that it takes to plank one of the hull sides. So I'm going to get that ready before I move this hull side out of the way. So this is the planer, the thickness planer that I use to get the cedar strips down to about 1/2 inch. And the way I do this is I adjust the thickness until, by using this dial right here, so that the first pass just barely takes off a little bit of wood, and then thereafter I try to take off about 1/32 of an inch on each pass. And for 9 boards at about 1/32 of an inch each, it almost fills up this dust collector. So this is how much dust is collected for 9 boards. So I just took the lid off to empty it. I have to empty it after every time that I run through all the 9 boards, because if this fills up, then I'll start collecting all this dust in the shop vac, and that will fill up the bag, which I'm trying not to do. So by using the Cyclone dust collector, it does a really good job of separating the sawdust before it lands up in the bag of the shop vac. So I wanted to show you exactly how much wood is being planed. So this is a cutoff of a piece of cedar after it's been run through the thickness planer several times. And this is a cutoff of the original cedar as I got it from the store. So this is what they call 1 inch thick, but it's not really 1 inch thick. But anyway, if we put these up side by side, and I have a 3/16 inch Allen wrench here, and you can see that that's about how much is being taken off. So about 3/16 of an inch total, and I'm making this in passes through the thickness planer of about 1/32 of an inch cutoff on each pass. And the way I do this is you'll notice that the original wood, one side is very rough and the other side is not as rough. So what I normally do is I will run it through the thickness planer on the extremely rough side first until it starts to become smooth, and then I'll flip it over and I'll run it through a couple passes on the other side until both sides are fairly smooth. And then whichever side needs more planing, like if there's a side that still has a lot of notches in it or rough spots in it, then I'll go back and I'll finish up that side, whichever side that is, until it comes down to the thickness here. Now, how did I arrive at this thickness? Well, what I really did is after planing several pieces of the cedar, I noticed that this was about the thickness that I could reliably get all of the rough spots out, as well as make sure that all the pieces could be planed down to this thickness fairly reliably and get both sides smooth. So it was just kind of trial and error, and it was still thick enough that after going through the hull testing, that I found that this was still quite strong, and I was unable to break it with the hammer when I did the destructive hull testing. So this is the thickness that I've settled on, and since then I've just been using this as a guide to make sure that all the thicknesses come out as close to this as possible. So after filling in all of the gaps, the extra epoxy has been sanded, and this is what it looks like now. Coming all along here and all the way to the end. And this joint here is nice and smooth, so that'll accept fiberglass very easily now. So the next step is to flip this entire hull side over so that I can cut off the excess cedar planks. So I mentioned I was going to do the second hull side a little bit differently by cutting these angles in the first set of cedar strips ahead of time instead of trying to sand them off. So one of the things is to figure out, roughly at least, what kind of angle we're looking at here. So with this angle finder, this looks like it's at about a 9.6 degree angle. So that's what I'm going to set up on the table saw and cut a couple of the 10-foot boards to have this angle already cut in it before I start any epoxy on the next hull. So that 9.6 degree angle when it was flat should, if my calculations are correct, correspond to a 80.4 degree angle on the table saw. That worked out very well. I was able to adjust the fence over to the blade so that we have the thickness of the 6mm plywood, and then I ran the cedar plank through and got a nice beveled edge coming down to the thickness here on this side that should match the plywood. And then while I was doing all of that, I got help from my two sons to flip over the hull side, and I'm letting it hang over the edge of the build platform a bit here so that I can come along with the jigsaw and cut off this cedar planks that's sticking out past the edge of the plywood hull side. Alright, so it's time to cut those cedar strips off now with the jigsaw. All of the cedar planking is now trimmed to the plywood side of the hull, and right now it's sitting. This will be the inside of the hull, so you can't see the planking right now. And when I'm not actually going to turn it over, I'm going to stand it up alongside the workbench here, where I had the two hulls standing on their side for a long time. So I'm going to stand this one up there so that I can start working on the next hull side, which all this time has been sitting underneath this plastic right here. So it is ready for to receive its reinforcement and planking. So I'm going to stand this one up and then uncover the plastic from this one so that I can start work on the next hull. The one hull side is now standing up, and this is why I wanted to do the thickness planing and cutting the edge, the beveled edge from the first strip of cedar planking, because now it makes it a lot harder with my limited workspace to be able to get to the thickness planer and the table saw with that hull side standing up. But now that it's standing up, I have access to the second hull side, which is down here, and I also flipped the the keels or the hull bottoms over so that I can get back to the planking again, because there might be some gaps that I need to fill in as well, and definitely some sanding that needs to be done. So that will be all for this video. Now that the one hull side is done, I'm ready to start moving on to the second hull side. So yeah, so I'm going to get this video posted. All right, that'll be all. Bye.